On today's episode of the Forgiven Nutritionist podcast, I'm talking with Dr. Debra Muth. She's a certified naturopathic doctor. She started out as a nurse in 1995, and in 1998 she completed her degree as a nurse practitioner. She completed her doctorate in naturopathic medicine in 2001 and became a board-certified anti-aging regenerative medicine specialist in 2003. In 2011, she founded Serenity Health Care in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Serenity is one of the Midwest's foremost integrative clinics providing care for patients worldwide. Dr. Muth has specialized in treating Lyme disease, toxic mold, chemical sensitivity, and of course hormones, which is our topic today. We talk about how hormones can play a role in moods and depression and anxiety. We talk about how estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone all play a role. We cover a lot in our talk, but I think you'll learn a lot. Here's a clip from today's episode. Yeah, so for someone who's maybe listening, what kind of test, if they just are going to a traditional doctor, because I know that I am able to offer getting some additional testings for my clients, and I know that you can as well. What kind of tests can be run that are outside of what the traditional doctor will do that can give you a really good baseline for where you're currently at? So that way they can, if they do it themselves, they can bring it to their healthcare provider and say, this is what I'm seeing and this is what I found out.
So from a traditional aspect, our traditional labs, so whether you go to like a Quest or a LabCorp or your local hospital, they can actually run hormone testing. So you can ask them to draw an estradiol, a progesterone, a testosterone level, a DHEA level. In some states, you can order that yourself through a company like Access Labs. Some of the compounding pharmacies will offer a salivary test where you just spit in a tube and that will give you the hormone tests. A lot of alternative places, there are ways you can tests and bypass your primary care doctor to get them. But if your primary care doctor is willing to work with you, you just ask them to draw a hormone test and they're going to look at you and say, hormones are not worthy of testing because they fluctuate moment to moment, day to day. And yes, that's true. They do. They fluctuate all the time. However, there should still be a hormone in a normal range. We should not see zero hormones in your body. And depending on where you are in your cycle, we can determine where your hormone levels should be at based on blood. Saliva usually comes automatically in that form. It's called a free form. A little bit harder because most of those hormones are bound to a protein and we can't see them as well. But there is an algorithm that those of us in functional medicine can use to identify where those hormones should be at.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. Pendulum has probiotics that help heal your gut. They have one specifically designed to help if you suffer from gas and bloating. It's called Butyricum. Butyricum is a targeted probiotic strain that can naturally be found in the gut microbiome. It has been shown to target multiple pathways in the gut that are linked to GI symptoms. All of their products are clinically studied and third-party tested for quality. Check out all of their products by clicking the link in the show notes and use code FORGIVEN for 20% off your first month membership. Welcome, Dr. Muth. Thank you so much for being here today. Why don't you tell my listeners?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I am a women's health nurse practitioner, conventionally trained. I'm also a naturopathic doctor, board certified in herbal medicine, nutrition. I own Serenity Health Care Center, which is the largest integrative practice in the Midwest. My passion has always been from day one of being in medicine is to work with women and primarily looking at female hormones. That's always been my love. It still is today. It's what gets me excited when I talk to people about hormones. And I think there's such an incredible role, and yet they're so misunderstood in so many ways. So that's why I love working with them. But I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother, I'm a wife, and I love being part of the integrative medicine space these days because it's ever changing and it's so exciting to be part of it today. We have so many tools today that we have never had before, and the opportunity to make people's lives really amazing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm a lot newer to anything healthcare related, but I was introduced to integrative nutrition a couple years ago too, and that's where I went to the School of Integrative Nutrition, and it was very eye-opening to me. And that's one of the things that I loved between functional medicine and integrative nutrition or integrative medicine is that they definitely look at the root cause, and they have a lot more things in their toolbox, like you said. And so, rather than just dosing out a prescription or saying you just have to go to physical therapy and that's it. Sometimes there's a whole wide range of things that need to take place, and you need to dig a little deeper or do a couple more tests to figure out what's really going on. And then sometimes that doesn't work, so then you have to dig a little deeper then again. So I'm glad that you're in that same space.
Yeah, thank you. It's, we've kind of coined ourselves as the medical detectives because that's what we do these days. We dig through all of the stuff that people are going through, look back as far into their life as we can, sometimes all the way back to their childhood, to try to figure out what changed, what caused the problem to occur. And once we do that, it's easier to find a fix than it is to say, well, you're not sleeping enough, you're anxious, you're a woman, you just need to take some more time off. We get patted on the back so many times from traditional medicine by doctors not wanting to listen to us and really take us seriously about what's happening. And so once you find somebody who's willing to listen and dig through for you, it's an amazing experience for people, and you finally feel validated.
Yeah, and one thing that I learned now that I'm here, growing up when I was ill for whatever reason, or in my young 20s or my 30s or in my 40s, not a lot of doctors or traditional doctors ask a lot of questions. And sometimes you don't feel validated or heard, and partially I think it's because they're not trained as well also. And they don't have the time to learn new things or to see other patients so they can ask additional questions, so that's why I'm glad also that I get a chance to ask questions. And I'm glad that there's other doctors out there that I can refer people to ask additional questions and maybe get the help that they need to figure out, like you said, we're medical detectives, and some people don't think about how things that happened in their childhood really impact their health today. Just because they're 50, doesn't mean that it only happened within the last few years. Sometimes it goes back 20 and 30 years or even longer.
Yeah, exactly.
So today we're going to talk about hormones, because that's what you love to talk about, and how they can affect the brain and show up as depression or anxiety, or maybe even some other symptoms. And I don't know that people really put together that your hormones can really affect not just your mood, but your overall anxiety and depression and some other things as well. So maybe you could go over the link between the hormones and depression and our moods, because I think that'll really help people understand a little better.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. Most of the time when we think about hormones, we think about hot flashes and night sweats for women. And for guys, we're thinking more energy or road raginess if they have too much hormone. But the reality is hormones drive every single thing in our body. We have hormone receptors. So think about receptors as these little finger-like things that reach out inside your body. They pick up the hormones as they're being circulated, and they take them to different parts of the body that are needed. So brain is number one, liver, kidneys, heart, spleen, all of the major organs, all of the major blood vessels need hormones in order to function properly. We've learned a lot about hormones and brain health, anxiety, depression, OCD from traumatic brain injury studies. So that's where a lot of the work comes from. People who've suffered traumatic brain injuries, who have swelling or inflammation or damage to their hypothalamus and the pituitary. And those are just simply organs that sit in our brain that are kind of like the divas of our hormone world. They control everything for us. And so if something gets where the hypothalamus and the pituitary get thrown off because you've got a bump on the head, all of a sudden those organs don't function the way they should, and they can no longer tell the body to make the hormones that they need to at a certain level. And it doesn't matter if that fall or that hit on the head happened when you were 10 or happened when you were 40, it's going to disrupt your hormone production. And we can decrease that inflammation, we can decrease the sensation that happens from the traumatic brain injury. However, sometimes we still will have a slowness of the development of our hormones, or we won't produce the hormones at a particular level. And each hormone controls different parts of our body. So, for instance, in a woman, we need estrogen in order for our brains to function properly. In order for us to think, for us to concentrate, for us to focus, we need estrogen. We need progesterone because it's our very calm, very euphoric hormone. It makes us go, yeah, whatever, who cares? I'll just roll with it. So without progesterone, you tend to see a lot more anxiety, a lot more irritability, a lot more insomnia in people that are suffering from progesterone deficiencies. And without estrogen is where you start to have more of that cognitive loss. Now, you'll certainly see more irritability and also a lot of crying that happens when estrogen starts to decline. And some people will say it's like Jekyll and Hyde. You're up and down and you're up and down. And part of that is because those hormones also control what we call neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are things like serotonin, you feel good and they're happy. And dopamine is what controls your mood. And when estrogen and progesterone decline, serotonin and dopamine get thrown off, and then that triggers a whole nother cascade of emotional issues, more anxiety, more depression, more forgetfulness, more irritability, more of that bipolar feeling if you're not getting enough dopamine. And so there's a whole host of things that can occur simply because that estrogen and progesterone are not being delivered at a level that they should be according to someone's age.
Yeah, and I think that especially since you brought up those two hormones, that is, like you mentioned before, when people are my age, they associate that with hot flashes and menopause and perimenopause, but they don't think about how, when you're someone who's 20, you definitely need to be having all of those things as well, just to function properly daily and to have your body work and optimally every single day. And
Right.
sometimes we take those types of things for granted because we don't see them, or we're not in the age that we think that we're going to be experiencing them.
Yeah, in a perfect world, we would test everyone's hormones age 20 because that's when they're at their peak of hormones, and we would know how much testosterone, how much estrogen, how much progesterone do you have. And then as you age, we kind of can see a trend of what's going to happen to you. So for people who have a lot of testosterone when they're young, they probably will not feel much when their estrogen declines, but when their testosterone declines, they're going to feel really miserable because they're used to running with a lot of testosterone, or vice versa. If they have a lot of estrogen, as that starts to decline, they're going to feel more miserable. And the truth is that we start losing progesterone at age 36. So that's when we really start to see some trends happen. And the first thing they usually see is sleep issues. They see more difficulty getting to sleep, more broken sleep, not enough restorative sleep. And that's where they're going to start to notice an increase in their PMS symptoms. And for those people that are listening, PMS is not normal. I know we've made it normal, we've made it acceptable, but it's not a normal thing. But without enough progesterone, you're going to have more PMS-like symptoms. So that week before your period, you're going to cry more easily, you're going to crave things, you're going to have maybe a little shorter temper, people aren't going to land on you as well, you're going to be more irritable with them. And so that starts to happen because of those hormones. But I will tell you, I'm even seeing 20 and 25-year-olds with not enough hormones these days. Men with testosterone levels of that of a 60-year-old and they're 25. Women who don't have enough estrogen and progesterone. And it's a sad state that we're seeing so much of this these days because they'll never understand what's normal to feel for hormones through their cascade of life because they've never started with enough hormone to begin with.
Yeah. And when you just mentioned about when you're 36, it immediately made me think, because all along, all the things that I had suffered that I knew were hormone related, as well as the depression and anxiety and things like that. But yeah, 36 was about the peak when I was experiencing a lot of other, we'll call them female issues. I had quite a few LEAP procedures done, and a couple other DNCs and things, because that's what the doctors knew how to do. But never once, I will tell you, never once did they actually test my hormones, and
Nope, they never do.
yeah, and it's unfortunate because I would have loved to have known then what I know now, so I could feel a lot better a lot sooner. And maybe some of that would have helped some of the other depression and anxiety things that I had going on as well. But yeah, it's funny that you said 36, because I'm like, yes, 36. That was those right around that time.
Year, right?
That was some interesting times. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's so many things we can link to hormones that we don't think of. For instance, if women are starting to have significant hot flashes and they're using estrogen and progesterone, or they're using some kind of herb to support estrogen and progesterone, oftentimes the next thing that we look at is serotonin, believe it or not. We start losing serotonin after the age of 40, and it starts to gradually decline. So that's why you see more sadness, more depression. We see much more hot flashes. We see a lot more cognitive decline when we don't have serotonin present. And the smaller amount of serotonin you have in your body, the worse your hot flashes will typically be. So if we can manipulate serotonin and bring that up, the transition through menopause from a hot flash standpoint and a memory standpoint can be so much better just by supporting that serotonin.
Yeah, and I think that when I look back growing up, I think that before I even had my first real bout of depression or anxiety or anything like that, I think that I was already low in the serotonin and not getting enough B6 and things like that. So, of course, then they didn't know anything like they know now, or even 10 or 20 years ago. But I think had we known or looked at something like that, or the doctors mentioned something like that to my parents when I was growing up, things could have been vastly different too. But then I wouldn't be here today either. So that's, I guess it led me full circle to the right place at the right time.
Isn't that the truth, right? We all learn for whatever reason we're supposed to, because that's our journey. But it is nicer now that we have more information and we can talk more about things and we understand things. I mean, even when I started out, we didn't understand how much serotonin was in the gut and how important gut health was to keeping a high serotonin level. And it's only been maybe the last 10 years that we've even seen the connection between serotonin and estrogen. So things have rapidly changed in the last decade when we're looking at gut health and hormones together and how it all plays a role in depression and anxiety.
Yeah. So for someone who's maybe listening, what kind of test, if they just are going to a traditional doctor, because I know that I am able to offer getting some additional testings for my clients. And I know that you can as well. What kind of tests can be run that are outside of what the traditional doctor will do that can give you a really good baseline for where you're currently at? So that way they can, if they do it themselves, they can bring it to their healthcare provider and say, this is what I'm seeing and this is what I found out.
Absolutely. I love that. So from a traditional aspect, our traditional labs, so whether you go to like a Quest or a LabCorp or your local hospital, they can actually run hormone testing. So you can ask them to draw an estradiol, a progesterone, a testosterone level, a DHEA level. In some states, you can order that yourself through a company like Access Labs. Some of the compounding pharmacies will offer a salivary test where you just spit in a tube and that will give you the hormone tests. A lot of alternative places, there are ways you can tests and bypass your primary care doctor to get them. But if your primary care doctor is willing to work with you, you just ask them to draw a hormone test and they're going to look at you and say, Hormones are not worthy of testing because they fluctuate moment to moment, day to day. And yes, that's true. They do. They fluctuate all the time. However, there should still be a hormone in a normal range. We should not see zero hormones in your body. And depending on where you are in your cycle, we can determine where your hormone levels should be at based on blood. Saliva usually comes automatically in that form. It's called a free form. A little bit harder because most of those hormones are bound to a protein and we can't see them as well. But there is an algorithm that those of us in functional medicine can use to identify where those hormones should be at. Now, you can get a blood serotonin level. I don't put a ton of weight in that test. Sometimes it's not as accurate. You're much better off with getting a urine neurotransmitter test. ZRT is a company that uses that. Senesco is another one that does that. And usually, again, you can find them through a place like Access Labs or Rupa Health. Sometimes you can order them directly there. And you can get those things done, and then you can bring them to your provider. Now, that being said, the provider you want to see, I would check with them first because sometimes they have discounts and they have access to tests that are going to be less expensive for you than just getting them by yourself. But if you really have no one and you're out in the middle of nowhere, get some kind of testing done and you can bring it to your professional that's going to work with you, and they can almost always interpret what you've got.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that other people can also order labs because I had never been exposed to, I could actually get it myself before I was in the field that I'm in now. Mm-hmm. But it's nice for people to know that they don't need necessarily a doctor to stand there and literally write the lab or the prescription for them to go to the lab. They can do that, and they can take matters into their own hands and be the control of their own health in a lot of situations that I don't think we realize.
Yeah, Life Extension's a great one for that too. If you go to lifeextension.com, and I think at least twice a year, they have a huge sale on their labs, and you can order anything. If you want to order thyroid or cholesterol or hormones, you can really order anything, and they will talk with you afterwards, and they'll connect you with people if you need connection with people. But it's really nice because your insurance doesn't cover certain things, and you can get it at a discount if you're not running it through your insurance as well. Don't depend on your insurance to cover all of this stuff because it's really not going to. Like a panel of hormone tests at the traditional hospital is going to run a person $1,800 these days. You and I can get that way less expensive through a lot of different companies. Even Life Extension can get it for you at a fraction of that price. So try to save your cash so that you can use it on treatment versus testing.
Right. And so as far as, you also mentioned thyroid. So how much does the thyroid play in when it comes to depression and anxiety, or is it more necessarily the adrenals that do you think that maybe play a role?
I think the adrenals play a role. I think the thyroid plays a role. Mm-hmm. So thyroid is your hub, right? And if you think about the brain communicates directly to the thyroid, then directly communicates to the ovaries, then the adrenal glands, then back to the ovaries, back to the thyroid, and back to the brain. So it's the first pass of that communication from the brain. And if your thyroid is off, and typically it's when it's more sluggish that we see more depression, but if it's overstimulated, you'll see a lot more anxiety happening there. And then you could be one of those autoimmune people and you're swinging back and forth between hypo and hyper on a pretty rapid basis. And now you're experiencing both underactive and overactive symptoms. But when the thyroid is underactive, everything in the body slows down. So your cognitive function slows down, your ability to have reflexes slow down, your ability to respond and think, everything slows down. And so when that happens, you tend to feel more depressed, you tend to have less energy, which then also makes you feel more depressed. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. But also when that thyroid slows down, not breaking down foods the way you're supposed to, you're not absorbing nutrients the way you're supposed to. So now you're getting hit from multiple angles. The sluggish thyroid's not producing the hormones, you're not digesting things, you're not absorbing things as well. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's hitting you from multiple aspects. So having that thyroid function at an optimal level is key. And I will tell you, most of our conventional practitioners today do not understand what an optimal thyroid level is at. They're real comfortable saying if your TSH is below 5 or 6, I'm happy with that. And I have some patients that come in and their doctors told them that if it was 10 or less, they're happy. And that is extremely high. You don't ever want to walk around with that. You want your TSH level to be 2.0 or less. That's an ideal TSH. So if anybody's listening, you've had thyroid drawn and you've been told it's normal, go back, get your test out, look it up, and see if it's 2.0 or less. And if it's not, get with somebody that really understands thyroid function so that you can be optimal.
I know thyroid is, it seems to me, anytime you hear a podcast or you see some doctors talking or you hear anybody talking, even if it's you're just friends sitting having coffee together, somebody always has some kind of thyroid issue. It's mostly Hashimoto's or hyperthyroid, like you said, hyperthyroidism. I know someone in my family that has hyperthyroidism. So they do have a lot of anxiety as well. And then a lot of people do, like you said, have a lot of hypothyroidism. And it's hard to get that, like you said, the optimal balance where you don't overactivate it and you don't underactivate it. You want it just right. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but it seems like everybody has some kind of thyroid issue, it to me is very, it's eye-opening and sad also because there's so much that they're missing out on, I think, when it comes to their health and just enjoyment of life when you have those issues.
Absolutely. And the older we get, the more inclined we are as women to develop hypothyroidism. That's just a natural thing that happens to us. But unfortunately, the way our environment is today, we're seeing more and more of that. And part of that's the pesticides, the herbicides, the artificial sweeteners. Our food is so contaminated with junk that it's disrupting our entire endocrine system. So when we think about hormones, whether it's female or male hormones or thyroid and adrenal, it's all part of what we call the endocrine system. And we have all these environmental endocrine disruptors, and they disrupting the way our body secretes these hormones. That's part of the reason we see more weight gain, part of the reason we see young people that don't have good hormone function. And so one of the easiest things you can do to clean your environment from these hormone disruptors is remove all your Glade plugins, remove all your candles that are not natural, remove all of your chemical-based cleaning products, and replace them with all natural sources. Use essential oils to make your house smell as nice as you want it to be. You can use essential oils to clean with. You can use vinegar and water, old-fashioned stuff like we always used to use. And that will significantly reduce your environment from these endocrine disruptors so that it takes the load off not just your hormonal function, but your adrenal function as well. And if you're somebody with Hashimoto's and autoimmune thyroid, it is key. You have to clean your environment up or you will never start to fix that Hashimoto's.
Yeah, and I think that's what some people forget. Even if they clean up their diet, and I just mentioned this with someone else too, if they clean up their diet and they get proper amount of exercise, they're getting good exercise and movement. But if you live in a toxic environment, I think that's what a lot of people forget, that just because it is the Glade plug-in or that their favorite scented candle that they purchased, from a nice store or they got gifted, that those can be very toxic, and those simple little things that we kind of forget and overlook.
Yeah.
So what are some foods maybe, or even herbs? Because I know that you like to recommend herbs, which I'm a huge fan of now as well. What are some foods and herbs that maybe kind of can help some of your, whether it's adrenals or your thyroid or just hormones in general, that are really good for that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So nuts and seeds are great for hormones. No soy. So eliminate that. If you have thyroid issues and even the hormone issues, do not do soy. That's a no-no for us in that world. Whole foods, fruits and vegetables, your dark green leafies. If you're going to do dark green leafies, though, definitely do them organic. You don't want a Roundup salad. You want an organic salad. That's really important. And your healthy fats, believe it or not, we need healthy fats to make our hormones and for our brain to function properly. So things like cod liver oil, fish oil, salmon oil, olive oil, avocado oil, those things are really great to cook with or to use as salad dressings. They're really important. The other thing I would do is, from an adrenal standpoint, you want to avoid caffeine and avoid sugar as much as you can, the white refined sugar. And I'd be curious how you feel about this, but I do let my clients use monk fruit or stevia if they want to in a limited amount. Like, don't go crazy and replace all your white sugar for monk fruit or stevia. But if you need a sweetener, go ahead and do that as well. And then certainly, like, high vitamin C foods are really great for the adrenal glands. You want as much vitamin C as you can get in there. Ashwagandha is one of my favorite herbs for adrenals. And L-theanine is another favorite. It's not an herb, it's an amino acid, but L-theanine is like nature's Xanax. So if you struggle with anxiety or you can't sleep, grab some L-theanine, and they make it in a chewable tablet. They make it in a capsule. I love the chewable tablets just because they work quickly, like within 5 to 10 minutes. If I feel myself kind of going throughout the day, I'm like, oh, just give me that. And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, oh, it's Zen time. It's great. But if you suffer from anxiety a lot, then do L-theanine every single day as your regimen to keep that anxiety down. Let's see, what other kind of foods do I like? I really like green tea for people. I think it's really helpful. It does have a little bit of caffeine, so you have to be careful. Don't swap coffee for green tea where you're doing just as much green tea as you were doing coffee if you're an addict. But a little bit of green tea is really good for you, and it's helpful for the gut.
I know before you mentioned some things to stay away from, especially if you have adrenal issues. One of the things that I immediately think of when it comes to anything hormone related is, which I know that people immediately go for when they have hormone issues, is alcohol. And I think that's a big contributing factor, not only for blood sugars, which also can contribute to hormone imbalance, but definitely just the moods. And I think people think that it calms them down, which maybe in the immediate it does, but the aftermath, which I like to think of it as like an undercurrent. When you have the water that seems smooth and calm on top, but really you have this undercurrent going on underneath. And I think that's the thing that people don't realize. So what are your thoughts on alcohol?
Yeah, I usually tell people to avoid alcohol with hormone issues. It's going to trigger a hot flash. Almost always, sugar and alcohol trigger hot flashes. But alcohol is actually a depressant. So if you're already struggling with mood issues, adding alcohol to that is just going to cause the depression to be that much worse. Besides the fact, you add to the fact that as women postmenopausal, we're struggling with weight gain too. It's just added calories that you don't need. But I think it does more harm than good. It disrupts our sleep. Even if you're only having a small amount, and no, some people will say, no, it helps me sleep. I would challenge that, because I bet they're breaking up in their sleep about 3 or 4 hours after they have that glass of wine and they fall asleep. They're going to have a lot of broken sleep, and they're going to have more hot flashes at night, and that's going to disrupt their sleep. So eventually it's going to create a bigger problem. Even though it might put you to sleep, it's not going to keep you asleep, and you're going to have more problems with it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I've never been a fan of alcohol anyways. One, I think it's expensive. And even if you drink at home, it's expensive. It's an expensive habit to have. And two, because I just felt, for me, I already struggled with depression and anxiety and things like that. And so to have another mood swing, or to finally feel what was possibly normal and then not feel normal, because again, you experienced the crash, which was not only related to the alcohol, but the sugars that were in the alcohol as well. It just did not serve me. So luckily I was able to stay away from that, and hopefully some other people will think twice when they reach for their glass of wine this evening.
Exactly. I'm with you. I'm the one drink drunk. So
Yeah.
it's not something I enjoy. It puts me to sleep like that. And then I wake up like 5 hours later and I'm all wired up. So I'm not a big fan of it myself either.
And since you mentioned sleep too, that's another thing that, yes, when I did have depression and anxiety, I did struggle with sleep. And you think that you
Mhm.
sleep a lot, but you don't really get good, adequate sleep or good restful sleep. And especially when you have any kind of hormonal issues. So maybe you could kind of talk about sleep and the kind of sleep that you should be getting. Because I think that people think that if they sleep for, like you said, 3 or 4 hours and then they have to wake up, oh, but I can go back to sleep again. It's okay.
Yeah, it's really not, is it? So we know that when serotonin declines, we are going to have more problems with sleep. So when somebody the middle of the night from 1 to 3, it's usually a liver issue. So we look at liver, that's when it dumps a lot of our toxins, is between 1 and 3 in the morning. And if you're struggling with that, you'll have a lot of broken sleep then. If serotonin is not high enough, you'll typically wake between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And you'll have that broken sleep around that time. And certainly people can have both. They can be breaking sleep all during that time, and you could have a liver issue and a serotonin issue. And if your serotonin is lower, you're going to have more night sweats or hot flashes between that 2 and 4 a.m. time. So that can be a problem as well. Ideally, in a perfect world, we'd like to get 7 to 8 hours of consistent sleep, restorative sleep. We want to get into that deep REM sleep. And you want to wake up feeling refreshed. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners are saying, well, I don't wake up refreshed and I don't have that solid sleep, but I'm sleeping later in the morning to make up for it. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. We don't make up sleep. So if we go one night where we're only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and then say the weekend comes and now we're getting 8 hours of sleep, we can't make up for what we lost on Monday and Tuesday, on Saturday and Sunday. It just doesn't work that way. So you want to try to get that nice restorative sleep consistently. And really looking at your diet is huge, because there's a lot of people that there's certain foods they eat that they will find as a pattern will disrupt their sleep, or certain things that they drink at night that will disrupt their sleep, and vice versa. There's other things that they can eat or drink and they sleep great. Sugar is going to be number one disruptive. Alcohol is a disruptive. Eating 4 hours before you go to bed is usually disruptive because your body's digesting, and the more your body has to digest, the less actual sleep you have and the more disrupted it's going to be. So having that solid sleep is nice. And if you have a Fitbit where you can track your sleep, or an Oracle ring, those are all really great tools to be able to track your sleep to see exactly how much am I getting. But I will tell you they're detrimental at the same time, because if you wake up and you check your Fitbit and it's like, oh, I got 4 hours of sleep, but you woke up feeling pretty good. When you see you only had 4 hours of sleep, you're not going to feel so good. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, no wonder why I'm so tired. No wonder why I can't think. So use them with a grain of salt, but they are good tracking tools to see if there's a pattern. And for you to start tracking, what did I eat? How much exercise did I get? How much water did I drink? You know, what kind of sleep routine did I put in that made me sleep better or worse? A lot of times you need that sleep routine. So you shut down your screens, you know, an hour or two before bed, so you can start to calm your mind. If you're going to read with a physical book, or put the blue light blockers on your Kindle so that it doesn't have that blue light flashing at you, because otherwise your brain's going to stay turned on and it's not going to fall asleep when it's supposed to.
Yeah, and I know that I every once in a while catch myself looking at my phone, especially if someone texts me or
Mm-hmm.
something. You know, I have a certain time where I
Mm-hmm.
try to, once it's that time, I don't look at my phone anymore unless someone is calling
Mm-hmm.
me and I think, okay, why is that person calling me? They don't normally call me this late. Then it must be something important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try not
Mm-hmm.
to, because I do want my body to start to wind down, and I do want to get good restorative sleep, especially because I'm definitely in that menopausal age. So I want to make sure that I help my body as much as possible to continue to get as much rest and restorative sleep as possible as well.
And that's so huge from a depression anxiety aspect too. When we don't get that good restorative sleep, we're more irritable, we're more moody, we can't think as well. And then when we don't think as well, then here comes the anxiety, the performance anxiety, the social anxiety. All of that is all tied up together. So the more we can have a wonderful routine of what we're doing and keeping ourselves steady and even, the better off we're going to be for sure.
Yeah, and I was just talking with a client recently and told them, I'll say I warned them a little bit that, because we were talking about sleep, that I think that they think that if they just start for a couple days, then they're going to get a new routine. And I said, no, it's not going to be that simple. You kind of have to really work at it for a long period of time to purposely work at getting your body and brain and all the chemicals and signals fired and firing at the right times. So it's going to take a little while to undo what has been done. And so it's hopefully someone else will realize too that, if I just, every night I'll go to bed at 8 for a week, and then sometimes that helps and sometimes it takes a little more than that.
Yeah. It takes a routine becomes a habit after 30 days. So it's hard to keep doing something for 30 days straight in a row. And we need that encouragement from people like yourself and our family to allow us to have that ability to deeply set that new routine for ourselves. And it's only after that you're going to even start seeing a glimpse of change. So yeah, if you're listening to us, it takes time to do these routines. And you know what? You're going to fall off the wagon and you're going to get back on. Don't beat yourself up about it. If you have a bad day or you have an event at your kid's school and now your 8 o'clock bedtime becomes 10 o'clock, that happens. You have to live life, but be gracious to yourself and then come back the next day and do it again and just keep trying.
Yeah, definitely. So I know that before you had mentioned essential oils, and I am a recent new fan again of essential oils. And I try to encourage some clients to pick a reputable brand also, because we don't want all those extra added fillers, like if they're trying to get away from the candles and things like that do have some of those extra chemicals in. We don't want to go to an essential oil company that's going to add some of those same things. And I'm glad that you brought up before some of the external things that can really disrupt our hormones, those endocrine disruptors, because I think that some people think also, for example, one of the things I try to educate, I have one client who has some hormonal issues and she's very estrogen dominant. And so I encouraged her to steer clear for a little while she's working on getting rid of some of those estrogens of lavender essential oil. And because I had heard that and learned that sometimes lavender can act like an estrogen in the body. And so if you already have a lot of estrogens, you don't want to add something else that's going to act like an estrogen. So I think there's a lot of, a couple little things like that sometimes people aren't aware of, that yes, although lavender essential oil is good for you, it's not perfect for everybody.
Right. The botanicals have very powerful properties to them. And if we think back in the day before we had medicine, we used plants for medicine. And so all of the plants that are in the essential oil world at one point were medicinal, and that's what we use them for. So knowing what each one of them can and cannot do before you use them can be really helpful, especially if you're going to apply them topically. If you're going to breathe them, probably not such a big deal as long as you're not breathing them for like 8 hours straight. But if you're going to apply them topically because you like the way they smell or you want a particular thing to happen as a result of it, very important what's going on and work with somebody who understands that for sure.
And I know that earlier in the conversation, you mentioned traumatic brain injuries and how it can kind of damage the pituitary gland and how they all connect. Maybe you could touch on, have you ever, I know that sometimes you see SPECT scans, which some of my people may not be familiar with what a SPECT scan is. But maybe you could kind of go over, is there something that you're able to actually see on those SPECT scans when they have a traumatic brain injury where you can see where it is affecting their hormones? Or is it just like tests that you run?
Yeah. So a SPECT scan, if you think of it as a 3D picture of your brain, and it comes in multiple colors, which is really nice for us because colors are easy for everyone to understand and to see. But we can actually see little divots or even sometimes major holes in the brain of people who've suffered traumatic brain injury. And it can go from the mildest form of traumatic brain injury, like you bent up and hit your head on a cabinet. We can see if there's trauma to the brain, there'll be a little divot, kind of like a little crater in the moon, if you picture it that way, versus somebody who's, say, a football player and they're getting their head bashed in every weekend. They are going to have bigger holes in their brain. And when they have those holes in the brain, obviously we have less oxygen, we have less blood flow to the brain, but then they start to disrupt our hormonal function, but they also disrupt cognitive function. And that's where depression, anxiety, OCD, anger, rage, those things start to come on. And it doesn't always mean, like, if you have a little divot versus a big hole, that your symptoms are going to be that much worse. You could have very similar symptoms from just having this little spot in the brain versus this big opening in the brain. So I wish it would correlate and say, oh, look, your symptoms are really bad because you have this huge crater in your brain versus this little one. But it's not like that. So even the smallest amount there could be really causing problems for people. And when we see that, we then know, like, okay, you've had a traumatic brain injury. And depending on what part of the brain was affected, whether it's the frontal lobe or the occipital or the temporal lobe, different symptoms will occur at different areas where that brain was damaged. And then you can come in and you can start to develop a reparative protocol for these people that suffer from this and start to rewire their brain, reconnect that hypothalamus and pituitary so they can start producing hormones the way they're supposed to again. And sometimes they'll never produce them the way they did before the traumatic brain injury, and you need to supplement with hormones. But oftentimes, if we catch it early enough, we can. The older we are, the harder it is. We're not going to make those hormones like we did when we were 25. But if, say, somebody's 30 and had that happen, oftentimes you can get their hormones to start to produce like they're supposed to, as long as there's not significant damage there.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people, unfortunately, have been in car accidents. So a lot of people can immediately think about that as a traumatic brain injury. But, and I remember one time when I was younger, I was explaining a very vivid dream and I was very theatrical, and I was showing something to my mom, and the chair slipped out from under me and I fell on my face and my body fell on top of me. So we don't always think about things like that because, again, I was probably 13 or 14 when I was telling my mom about that dream and that happened. But some people don't think about too, like when you're horseback riding and you get thrown off a horse, you just think, oh, I'm fine. There's no scratches on me. I didn't break a bone. And people don't think about how those types of brain injuries also can definitely impact your hormones and how day-to-day life can be different for you. And sometimes it can heal, like you said, especially if you catch it early enough and address it and help your body heal it.
Yeah, something as simple as a whiplash can cause a traumatic brain injury. And if we think of how many times a 2-year-old falls while they're learning to walk and hit their head, I mean, they hit their head constantly, and we never think that that's a traumatic brain injury. But it is. It's a head injury that is causing swelling for them. So oftentimes, many of us have had multiple traumatic brain injuries before we even learned to walk and we even recognized it. Not to mention as we get older and flip off the bike or, fall on your face like you did, and I've done that, passed out, and just things like that. It's so many times. If you start to sit down and think about how many times you've had a head injury where maybe it wasn't a true traumatic brain injury and you didn't lose consciousness, but you had a head injury enough where you went, oh my gosh, that really hurt. It's probably more times than you realize. And when that happens, nobody will take you seriously. Like, I had this traumatic brain injury when I was 5, right? And now I think this is my hormones. Unless you talk to someone like yourself or myself who's been trained in this, they won't take you seriously with that. But you really do need to explore what's happening then with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. There are tests that we can run to see how well that's functioning and whether or not there's a problem with it.
Well, that's good. Hopefully somebody out there listening will maybe put some of those things together, especially if they currently are experiencing any kind of hormonal issues, and maybe just think that, oh, this isn't my lot in life, that I'm stuck with a bad thyroid, or I've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Maybe was there something else that maybe possibly could have contributed to that, and let's maybe figure out what that root cause is. So hopefully someone will learn a little something or ask a few more questions now.
Absolutely. And, I would say if you have an autoimmune disease, look back at your life. Like, what have you been exposed to? Start to think, have I been exposed to a water damaged building? Have I been exposed to chemicals somewhere? Was I a swimmer when I was younger and I was in a pool with chlorine for, 5 or 6 years? Or was there a chemical dump somewhere around the place where you grew up or you lived? All of those kinds of things can trigger thyroid and hormonal dysfunction. And there's lots of different websites you can go on to see if there's been toxic dumps in your area that nobody ever tells us about. But they have to report it. And so you can find it online. And then, like I have many patients who are a mile or two within a company that, quote unquote, accidentally had a chemical spill and contaminated the water around them. And they've never been forced to clean up. And then here you find out 5 years after this happened, the person started getting sick with something. So be a little detective on yourself and try to figure out like what all occurred before you were diagnosed with these things. And you'll find a lot of answers there.
Yes, definitely. Well, before we wrap up, I always like to ask my guests what their don't miss this moment is, that maybe they want the listeners to kind of take away and really think twice about, or really take to heart. So what would your don't miss this moment be?
I would say my don't miss this moment is the chemicals. I don't think we put enough importance on what these chemicals in our environment can do. And although they're all, quote unquote, FDA approved chemicals, if you follow the FDA at all, they don't care about truly protecting us. They're just protecting the company's interests. So don't trust that it's FDA approved. Do your own research, look up the chemicals that you're using. If you can't pronounce something, don't use it. That's the best rule of thumb. But those chemicals are extremely disruptive, and we can actually measure chemicals in someone's body to see how they're clearing them and if they are or not. But these are things that are going to trigger hormonal disruption, adrenal disruption, autoimmune disease, cancer. They're huge. So I would say put a lot of weight on that. If you're starting to just clean up your area, do it a little bit at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself, but definitely do it.
Yeah, it definitely can be overwhelming. So I definitely like that part as well. Do a little bit at a time, start with one thing and then tomorrow start with another thing.
Exactly. If you think you're going to throw out everything in your pantry and everything in your house and replace it, it gets expensive and it gets extremely overwhelming. So don't do that. But as you're replacing things, as you're using things, just go buy a more natural source. And you can find them pretty much anywhere these days. Find a more natural source and start using some of those things and do it a little bit at a time.
Well, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and giving up your time so the listeners can maybe learn a little something, and hopefully they'll think twice about some of the things they're using, or look at the list of ingredients at least before they start to decide to change. So,
well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much. And I'm hoping to maybe have you back on again someday.
Anytime.
Well, thank you very much. If you are looking for a trustworthy place to choose all of your supplements, FullScript has 285 different brands to choose from. They did the work for you to check quality standards for all the supplements they carry. These standards are important because they help to ensure a product is safe, effective, and accurately labeled. FullScript uses third-party companies to provide unbiased assurance that certain quality criteria are met when they add a company or product to their inventory. When you set up an account with FullScript, use my link and you'll always get 15% off your supplements. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and spirit, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use. Or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals with your current healthcare provider. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.